Today we're going to be learning Nazir Daf Mem Gimel. Purim Sameach to everybody, even to those celebrating tomorrow. Today's Daf is sponsored by Betsy Melman in memory of her father, Tzvi Menachem Mendel ben Shlomo Zichrono Lebracha, Harold Monshine, on his 39th year at site that was on the 11th of Adar. Today's Daf is sponsored in memory of Shel Bellows, who passed away this week. Today's Daf is sponsored by Amy Cohn in memory of her sister, Cindy Nava, whose year at site is today. I can't believe it's been 18 years since her passing. I remember you learning Gemara with Abba Zichrono Lebracha with just so much zest. Love you and miss you so much. Okay, we're going to get started with a quick review of what we did on Amud of yesterday's daf, which was quite complicated, and I want to just summarize it briefly so we can get started. It's the lead into today. We saw a machlokah between Raba and Rav Yosef about what Rav Huna holds regarding the isulim for a Nazir of becoming impure. So let's start with the pasuk again. Kol yimei hiziro laHashem, all the days you're a Nazir, al nefesh meit lo yavo. You should not, that's this weird phrase, lo yavo, you should not come, which they're going to explain means don't come into a tent with someone who is dead. Lavivu limo lachivu lachoto lo yitama lahem b'motam. Don't become impure to any of your relatives, even your relatives, basically, when they die. We're going to get to this word b'motam later today. So here we have two negative commandments. One is lo yavo, one is lo yitama. How do these two work in with each other? So Rabba bar Rav Huna said, when it says lo yavo, lo yitama, these are two separate lo tases, and everybody agrees with this, okay? Which basically means the way we understood it yesterday, which is going to be different the way we're going to understand it today, but the way the Gemara understood it until now was, if you become impure by touching someone and you're a tameh, and then you walk into a tent with a dead body, you're liable twice. But what's the machloket between Rabbi and Rav Yosef? What if you came in contact with a dead body, and then you came in contact with another dead body, you touched both of them, let's say. Would you be liable twice? Because you did two wrong things. On the other hand, comes Rabbi and says, what do you mean? You're already in a state of impurity. It doesn't make a difference if you touch another dead body. Once you touch the dead body, so you touch another one. You're already, so to speak, messed up, right? You've already, you've done the chilul, so it doesn't really matter anymore. Okay, in the words of the Gemara, hamitame v'kayim. You're already mitame and kayam. You're already in a tame status. Anything more, it shouldn't really make a difference. So going on Raba now, okay, after then we had questions on Rav Yosef's approach. If you remember, Rav Yosef said you could be liable twice for being tameh and tameh again, and Abaye brought some questions against him. He responded, there's chibulim, there's lo chibulim. We resolved all that. Then we have tuma v'tuma lo. So we're starting 3 lines from the bottom of Membed Amud. About tuma tuma lo, daha mitame v'kayim, right? The reason why Rabba, going back to Rabba said you can't be chayav on tum'ah and tum'ah because you're already in a status of impurity. But tum'ah ubi'ah nami hamitame v'kayim. According to you, you shouldn't be chayav either for tum'ah and bi'ah, because once you're tameh, so what if you go into a tent of a dead body? You're already tameh. What's the difference? Again, the same logic should apply to tum'ah and bi'ah. To which we're going to now have to re-understand what he meant when he talked about tum'ah and bi'ah. We thought it meant you became tameh to someone and then went into a tent of another dead person. And that would make you liable twice. But it doesn't make any sense according to him. Why should you be liable twice? You're already impure from touching a dead body. What's the difference? It's not like we're talking about there's tumat maga, tumat oel, and they're two different things and because of that. No, it's this low taseh of don't go into a space where there's a dead body. But if you're already impure, what's the difference? Again, it's only a question of Rabbah, because Rabbi Yosef thinks you can be mechayev tameh and tameh. So of course you're going to be chayav tameh and bi'ah. You go into an oel. So I'm Rabbi Yochanan, kam bebayit, kam besadeh. We're now going to say that if you're in a house, what does it mean if you're in a house? It means you became impure in a house. Meaning, when you walked into that house or tent, whatever it was, you weren't impure. While you walk in, what happens to you? 2 things happen. You're liable, number 1, for becoming impure, and you're also liable for lo yavo, for not going into a tent. So we would have to find a case where it all happened at the same time. If one happens before the other, so there's no meaning to the second one. That's the sadeh, hamba sadeh. If you're in a field, which means there's no tent, and you became impure to a dead body by coming in contact with it, or however you did. You could have walked over a grave or something, and then you walked into an OL, you wouldn't be liable for lo yavo, because for not going in, because you're already impure. But if it all happens as you walk in, then you can be liable for both. To which the Gemara says, and here's one of these classic, what you call them, almost, very detail-oriented sugyo, very, we'll see, you'll see in a minute. The Gemara says, wait a minute, B'bayit nami, also in a house, you're going to have a problem. Because kevandi yayel yade istaev. As soon as, when you walk into a house, think about it, you turn the doorknob and your hand goes in first. So if we want to have all of this happen at the same time, when you walk into a house, it's not going to all happen at the same time. Because when are you liable for impurity? Well, as soon as your hand goes in the house, your hand is in a tent, your hand will become impure, which makes you impure. But when are you liable for going into a house? When the majority of your body goes in the house. So in this case, when you walk into a house, first your hand gets impure. And then, right, ki ayal kulei hai, when the rest of you, the majority of your body goes in, which was when you be chayav and lo yavo, tamehu, you're already impure for a second before. So they reject, Rabbi Yochanan, or not reject, but they said we have to modify what you said, because it's not really perfect. We're going to keep having, this is why I said it's very classic Gemara sugya, we're going to keep having question upon question. Every time we give an answer, we're going to say, it doesn't really work. If really your arm goes in first, mishum tuma ika mishum bialeka, you're really only going to be liable once because of tuma, and you're not going to be liable for bia because you already became impure before your whole body went in. But gufo, but if you put your body together when you walk in, meaning your arm is not extended into the house, but you walk in with your arms by your sides, then the majority of your body will get there first. Will go in at the same time. So that's how it would be. So that's Rabbi Elazar's answer. But what do they say? What do you mean? But still your nose goes in first, your nose juts out from your body. So when you walk in, your nose is going to go in first, in which case you're going to become impure before your body becomes impure, or the majority of your body comes in, not because before your body goes into the house, which is lo yavo. So Ella Amarava, new answer. If you bring in your arm or your nose or whatever it is first, then you're not going to be liable twice. But if you put in, let's say you walk in with your head to the side, and then your nose is not going to go in until, right, you won't have anything jutting out. Your body will be kind of in a straight. Now, by the way, this is all basically seeming like you would have to intend to somewhat do this, right? And why would you do that? Because if you intend to do this, you'll actually be liable twice, okay? But what they're trying to say is if by some strange chance you were able to go in such a way that the majority of your body goes in first, your nose wasn't jutting out, so that should work. But to which the Gemara says, still it's not going to work because your toe juts out first. Your toe's going to get in before. So it doesn't really make any sense. Now, theoretically, they could have said you could have walked on the side, right? Sideways. Okay, but the Gemara stops at this. They realize they're not getting anywhere with this, and we can be as nitpicky as we want, but this isn't a good answer. So now we're going to have two potential answers. I see already one of them, someone wrote in the chat. Good thinking. Ela Amar Rav Papa. The first one is a classic Gemara answer to this kind of a question. They love this case, even though it's super unrealistic. Somebody brings you into the room in a box, a closed space, where whatever you're in is blocking the impurity from getting to you. So now what happens? Your friend comes and opens up the box. At that point, what happens? At that point, the tumah comes onto you at the same time that you end up being liable for being inside a tent. Okay, you're actually not liable for walking in the tent, but you're liable for being in the tent. So that would be the one possibility, the tumah ubiya b'hadei adadikatin, because it all happens at the same time. Because as long as you're in this box that's enclosed, you're not impure at all. And when he opens it, in comes the impurity, and you're in a tent with a dead body, you're liable twice. Problem with this answer, you didn't actually do anything. You're going to get lashes because someone else opened this box. That's a little weird, right? You shouldn't be liable for an action someone else did. So the commentaries say that it would have to be that either they offer some possibilities, some say one, some say the other. Either you helped open the opening, which is a little bit strange because it specifically says someone else came and opened it, or you asked them to open it, or you agreed to them opening it. Somehow you had to have been either actively involved or passively involved. Otherwise, you really wouldn't be liable. Second answer, which is what I saw suggested in the chat, Mar bar Rav Ashi amar kegon da'ayo kashu goses unafak nishmate adiyati v'tuma ubia bahade hadade kat. Mar bar Rav Ashi says, what's the case? You went in when the person wasn't dead yet. They were leaning toward death. They were on their deathbed. And what happened? Once you went into the room, at some point after, they died. So in that case, Tuma and Bia would happen at the same time. So we've now come up with how to resolve Raba in this distinction he makes between Tuma and Bia versus Tuma and Tuma. Even Tuma and Bia shouldn't be a problem because once you're Tameh, nothing else should mess you up after that. You're already, so to speak, messed up by having become impure. And therefore, we have to come up with a case where it all happens simultaneously. And that's the two options we eventually came up with about going in this box where they open it up, or the person was alive when you walked in the room and died after. Tanna Rabbanit. Now we get to a machloka between Tanna Kama and Rebbi it's really playing on this issue of the goses, someone who's about to die. Lehechalo. Okay, now we're quoting a pasuk by the kohen. Lo itama bal ba'amav lehechalo. This is the kohen gadol. We're always comparing kohen gadol and Nazir. It's the same basically because both of them are not allowed to be impure to anyone. We'll get later to what about, if we have both of them and we have to make choices, which one is more severe, which one is less severe. That's going to be at the beginning of the 7th chapter. But right now, lehechalo, we're going to assume they're the same basically. Ad sha'ashi yamut. What is lehechalo? It means to disqualify. But it also comes from the language of halal. Halal is a dead body. So they say it's only lehechalo, you'll only have done something wrong, meaning become impure, if they're dead. Okay? So meaning, if they're, sounds like anyway, if they're goses, it's not a problem. Rebbi Yomi, bimotam yitama. Okay, it says, it's really lo yitama. Okay, so let's read the pasuk. Also this is by the Nazir actually. His father, mother, brother, sister. Lo yitama lahem bimotam. Don't become impure to them in their death. So what do we learn from this? Obviously, ad sheyamut, until they die. That's quite clear. Lehechalo maybe was a little less clear. This is quite clear. So my binayu, what's the difference between these two opinions? They're both actually saying the same thing. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. We're going to have a machloket Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about this Tannaitic debate. Rabbi Yochanan, it's just a matter of how they darshan the pasuk. Which pasuk they darshan. One learns it from the Hechalo of the Kohen Gadol. One learns it from Motam of the Nazir. But Reish Lakish amar, goses ika benayu, our case that we were just discussing, a goses, someone who's about to die, actually one of them is going to think it's a problem. Okay? How will we see this? Leman de amar lehechalo, desecrate, afilu goses. Because again, lehechalo, the word to desecrate, comes from the root halal. Halal is a dead body. And even someone who's about to die is sometimes called a halal. Okay, we're talking where, you're in your last breaths of life. So in your last breaths of life, you're already somewhat considered a halal, according to Reish Lakish. Now, obviously, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't think this. And therefore, even a goses, it would be forbidden for you to be metameh. You can understand why they would say this, because if you're going to be with someone who's about to die, right, they could die any second, and you should really avoid being there. So is it forbidden by Torah law, or is it just, good advice to stay away? So according to Reish Lakish says that if you're holding by this opinion of lehechalo, by that drasha, then you're actually disagreeing on the whole issue here about goses. And you're going to say that a goses is forbidden for a Nazir or Kohen Gadol to be in a place where there's a goses. Leman damar b'motam, but if you say in their death, it's very clear that we mean death, and death is determined by death and not by on your deathbed. Ad sheyamut in goses lo, okay, but not someone who's about to die. Now we're going to have the classic ping pong. Leman damar lehechalo haktiv b'motam, but if you're going to say lehechalo, doesn't it say b'motam? What are you going to do with that? He's going to need it for something that Rebbe says. Detanya Rebbe Yomi. Remember, it said your father, your mother, your sister, your brother do not become impure to them in their death. That comes to teach you, don't become impure to them in their death, but if they're a leper, and this, by the way, isn't just your relative, it could be anybody, or if they're a zav or a zavat. Now, lepers and zav and zavat are called av hatuma. If you come in contact with them, you touch them, for example, or mitzvah, you could even be in a tent with them, then you become impure as well. What kind of impurity? 1 day impurity. What this is telling you is there's no prohibition for a Nazir to become impure to a leper or to a zav, okay, or a zava. There's no problem with that. If they become impure by coming in contact with them, let's say, they'll be impure for a day and it's fine. It has no effect on their nizirut, okay? So that's what it's saying, bimotam, okay? But not, don't become impure to them in their death, but you can become impure to them if they're a leper, if they're, right, something else. Now, I just want to point out there's a bit of a problem here because Rebbe, go back to Rebbe, this was Rebbe, bimotam and not bizivatam or their tzara, their leprosy. But Rebbe had already darshan by us, bimotam yitama ad shiamut. You can't darshan two things from the same pasuk, right? This is a question on Tanna Kama. What does Tanna Kama do with bimotam? And we said, he learns what Rebbe learns, but Rebbe learned by us bimotam for that not a goses. So that's a little bit strange. So the Gemara is going to ask it not the way I'm saying it, which is that's Rebbe and that's Rebbe, but just in general. Lamanda amar bimotam if you hold bimotam in our debate, that you're going to learn from there, that when the person dies, you can't become impure to them. Well, how do you learn this other halacha? We assume that everybody holds the other halacha as well, that a Nazir can become impure to a leper or to a zav. So what do we do with that? Well, we have the classic answer to, right? Normally we have this concept, you can't learn two drashot from one pasuk, but you can if it's got a unique way of being worded. And therefore, if it wanted to say one thing, it would have worded it this way. Because it didn't word it that way, you can learn two things from it. You could have said, don't become impure to them, bimmot, when they die. Or, right, when dead, let's say. My bimmotam, what's when they die? Why do you add that extra mem at the end? Shmat mina tarte. From here, you can darshan two things. So again, Rebbe is going to say, we learn bimotam yitama ad shiamut, and he's going to learn bimotam, but not when they're lepers. Tanna Kama, who learns lehechalo is ad shiamut, is going to learn one thing from bimotam, and bimotam will teach you when they die, but not when they're lepers or zavi. Next, now we have to go to the other one, and it's going to be a very similar structure. Lamanda amar bimotam haktiv lehechalo. What do you do with that word lehechalo? It appears by the kohen gadol. Which again, this question is really for Reish Lakish, even Rabbi Yochanan, but more for Reish Lakish, who thinks that there's actually a practical difference between them. The lehechalo will mean a goses. So lehechalo lahachi u'da'ata. It comes for something else, which we saw on the previous page. It's only someone who wasn't yet desecrated, but one who already became impure. There's no forbidden. It's not forbidden for them anymore. It's only asur lehechalo, to desecrate yourself. If you've already become tamei to one person, you're not going to be liable for becoming tamei to another person. Now we're going to have to go back. So this was Rebbe, who says bimotam is when they die. Lehechalo is to teach you this other halacha. So now we're going to say, well, what about the one who said lehechalo? Doesn't the one who say lehechalo have to also say that lehechalo is not only is both things, right? Not one, number one, until they die, or maybe like Reish Lakish says, goses. And also this issue that once you became tamei, you're not liable for becoming impure again. So again, they're going to have the same type answer. In kain lemaka lehechel. My lehechalo shmat minatarte. Again, just could have said lehechel, to profane. You don't say to profane himself. Obviously, he's profaning himself. Who else would he be profaning? So lehechalo comes to teach you two things. Okay, so what we did so far, let's just review our daf for a minute. We started with this tuma and tuma, right? How could it be tuma and bi'ah? And as if tuma and tuma wouldn't be liable twice, how could tuma and bi'ah be liable twice according to Raba? To which we answered, it would be, eventually we got to these two answers of either you came in a box or you went when he was goses. Because we started talking about the goses issue, Then we start to talk about this debate. Is it forbidden at all for a Nazir to be in a place, or a kohen gadol in a place where someone's goses? Okay, which, right, we got to kind of off to this, like, based on Reish Lakish, on his understanding of this debate, but that's why we got here. So anyway, we have this debate. You learn it from Lahechalo, or do you learn it from Bimotam? And Rabbi Yochanan thinks they both think it's only in death, not when they're gosim, like the previous sugya. Reish Lakish says that according to Tanna Kama, it's actually even a goses is going to be forbidden. Okay, and then we just had to deal with what does each one do with the other one's pasuk? And then once we said he uses it for some other drasha, we had to say, how does the other one deal with that drasha? Because we assume that drasha is agreed upon everyone. So we end up saying each word could have been worded differently, and each, one on each, in each one could claim we can learn two things from here. Okay, obviously the other one would claim we can't learn two things from there, because if you could, then they'd have the same problem. Okay, because each time they say, what did you do with this pasuk? And then in the end they say, well, I use that pasuk for something else, and therefore I can't learn it from there. And then the other one said, well, I could use this pasuk for two things. That was what we basically did. Now we're going to have a meitive, a question of Reish Lakish. Adam eino metameh ela ad shetetzeh nafsho. So again, a person does not become impure to a dead body until completely all the life leaves the person. Afilu miguyad, afilu goses, even if he's cut up, even if he's goses is on his deathbed, right? You could be cut up but still kind of breathing, right? As your last breaths are going out of you, or you're on your deathbed about to die. Ulamanda amar lehechalo hakatane de'eno metameh. But it says here, a person does not become tameh until that point. And if the whole problem with the Nazir or kohen gadol is to become tameh, it says here very clearly, you're not tameh if it's goses, if it's this. To which the Gemara answers a very interesting answer, which requires further thought. Le'inyan tamuye, when it comes to tuma, ad denafka nafshe, until really the life leaves them. But le'inyan itachule ha'itach. If you're a Nazir and a kohen gadol and you're in a room with the goses, you've already violated, you've profaned your high level of what you have. In other words, you're not necessarily, it sounds like, you're not necessarily impure, but you've done something wrong already, okay? Just that stage has already gotten you kind of into trouble, okay? And that has already been a desecration of what you're commanded to do. So this is a good question how to understand this, but I'm going to leave it aside for today. It requires further research. Amar Rav Chisda Amar. Now we're moving on to a different halakha, okay? So this part we've already summarized. We've gotten the two sections we did basically very simply. Tum'ah and bi'ah, when could that happen that you be liable twice according to Raba? Right? Because according to Rav Yosef, it doesn't matter. You could do one after the other. Only according to Raba, you would have to have them both happen at the same time. And then this issue of goses, are you liable or not? This machloket of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, based on, can you see this as a debate within the words of Tanna Kama and Rebbi or not? Rabbi Yochanan thought they both were saying the same thing. You really have to die in order for it to be a problem. Reish Lakish had this other opinion, which seemed to be contradicted from this Tannaitic source, to which they resolved it in some unclear manner. There's something tuma, and then there's chilul, okay, desecration. That they can already do at the stage of goses, again, according to Tanna Kama, not according to Rebbi. Okay, it's a debate among Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, whether or not it is in fact the Tannaitic debate. Now we're getting to another halacha, which is a little bit hard to digest in my mind. Amar Rav Chisda Amar Rav, nikta rosho shel aviv eino metameh. Okay, by the way, this whole shiur, I didn't have enough time to research all the practical. What did I see? Also, there was some discussion in the chat about it. All these things, halacha lamasa, how does this work, are very important questions. I mean, kohen gadol nazir less so, because we don't really have that in our day, but for the most part. But certainly this is a very practical issue coming up right now, unfortunately. Amar Rav Chisda Amar Rav, nikta rosho shel aviv. Now we switch to a regular kohen. Talking about laws of impurity and different situations of goses, they move into this. What if the head of your father is cut off, okay, meaning he gets killed with body parts, okay, it's a little bit grotesque stuff, being cut off, eino metameh. It's a very tough halacha to swallow, especially in light of, whether it be terrorist incidents or other crazy situations. If someone's head is not intact, the son is not allowed, if the son's a kohen, he cannot become impure, not to his father, not to any member of his family. My taima, amar krat la'aviv, because it says to your father, Interesting drasha. Bizman shehu shalem v'lo bizman shehu chaser. Only if the father is complete. If the father's body is not complete, but limbs are separated from the body, then you can't become impure. Amar Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna says to him, I don't get it though. If you're on some path in the middle of nowhere and ganavim chop off his head and you're with your father, what? You're not going to become impure to him? Amar lei. So Rav Chisda says to him, why are you asking me a question from a mate mitzvah case? Mate mitzvah ka'amarta? You're talking about, the father and the son are there. Of course the son can become impure. That's already a different category. That's called a mate mitzvah. So even if his limbs aren't intact, you're liable. You're obligated to help. Mate mitzvah is, we'll see in a second how they define mate mitzvah, but it's when there's no one else to deal with the burial. Anyone is allowed to, even if you're a kohen, even if it's not your relative. Mate mitzvah ka'amarta? You bring me a case of a mate mitzvah. Now that, if someone else is allowed to become impure, some other kohen, of course the son can for his father. So which they say, V'hai mate mitzvah, who says this is a mate mitzvah case? What's mate mitzvah? Let's figure out, how do we define mate mitzvah? It's mate mitzvah when your father gets his head chopped off by some bandits on the road. That's not the way we define mate mitzvah. V'hatanya, it says in a braitot, Ezu mate mitzvah. It's someone who has no one to bury. If you would call out, let's say you're still alive, and you would call out, that's not a mate mitzvah. In other words, if you would call for help, and people would come help you, that's not a mate mitzvah. Obviously, if you were alive, right? It's just theoretically. Are there other people around? If there are other people around, then it's not a mate mitzvah. If there's no one else around, then and he had his son with him, so he wasn't alone. To which they say, what are you talking about? No, he was out in the middle of nowhere. And it was just him and the son. So that's why Rav Chisda says in that case, and obviously it would be, if it wasn't the case, it would sound like Rav Chisda wouldn't think that he could be. Okay, so if you're on a strange, out in the middle of nowhere and there's nobody else around and some bandits come along, chop off the father's head, that kohen is going to be allowed to become impure to his father, but because of a mate mitzvah issue, not because it's his father. Now, so that was a side question. But now we get to some two basic questions. We're going to have two braitot. We're not even going to finish the second one today. But both braitot are going to seem to contradict what Rav Chisda said. So again, Rav Chisda said, if your father's missing limbs off his body, then you cannot become impure. His body is not whole. Meitive, braitot that says the opposite. La itama. Now we're talking about the sister. It says there, he can be tamei to his sister, who's a virgin. So a kohen, la itama. What do we learn from this? He can become impure to her, but not to limbs of hers. This isn't the same thing. This is just if there's limbs of her body, he can't become impure to them. Okay, they're saying, how do we know this? Because you can't become impure to a limb of the father's body that was cut off. Let's say the father's still alive, but has a limb cut off. That limb carries impurity. A kohen is not allowed to become impure. But what is he allowed to do? Again, a little grotesque. The father died, and the son became impure to the father. But at the scene of the death, there were some bones of the father that had become detached. So he could go back and collect bones, even if they're larger than the size of a barley. Because the etzem k'sorah is the amount that's metame in maga, by touching. Meaning once the son's already impure to the father, he can collect bones of the father that were left, wherever they were. Okay, he's allowed to touch them. So you can't touch limbs of your family members. If the family members are alive and the limb gets cut off, that's impure. But you can, again, it doesn't say this, but the assumption is after becoming impure to the father or sister, whoever it is, you can go collect body parts that were left there, okay, or bones. Now, obviously from here, my mechazehu al etzem k'seorah. What's this case of he's going back to get bones? Isn't this saying even if, obviously if he's collecting bones, it means the father's body is not complete. And didn't we say he can only become impure to the father if the father's body is complete? Obviously if there's bones missing, the body's not complete. So how could this be? According to what Rav Chisda said. To which they answer, lo, hayi Rabbi Yehuda. Don't worry about that braitot. That braitot is Rabbi Yehuda. Rav doesn't hold by Rabbi Yehuda. Now, presumably the rabbis disagree with him. How do we know this is Rabbi Yehuda's approach? We're going to prove it from another braitot. We're going to have three braitot here. Two are going to be brought to contradict, And one is brought just to identify this approach is identified as Rabbi Yehuda only. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, la mitameh. So this braitot is brought just to prove that Rabbi Yehuda is the one who holds this. And can become impure to her, but not to her bones, her limbs, like we said before. This is very similar. It's just saying in a little bit of a different language. You can't become impure to limbs from your father who's alive if a limb gets detached, but you can become impure to a limb of your father who's dead. Just like we said, you can go collect his bones after you become impure to the father. So there you see it as Rabbi Yehuda explicitly. And yes, you're supposed to bury a person, including their limbs. That's why they're going to collect the bones, to bury them. That's exactly the idea. Rav Kahana Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Second question. It's going to be the exact same idea. Isn't there this braitot that Rav Kahana brought from the school of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? La mitame ve'eno mitame le'evarem. He can become impure again, drasha on the sister, but not to her limbs. Prat lekazayit menamet ukazayit netzel umalo tarvad rekev. This comes to exclude what can't he do? He can't become impure to a kazayit of a dead body, like flesh, a kazayit's worth of flesh. Kazayit netzel, liquids that come from a dead body. Kazayit of would be matami. He can't become matami to that. Umalo tarvad rekev, if there's dust from the body, and the shovel full is the amount he's not allowed to become impure to. So if all these things he can't become tameh, you might have thought, and this is the important part, lo yitama lishidra ulagolgolet ulerov binyana ulerov minyana. You might have thought you can't be impure if, let's say, her vertebrae, okay, the vertebrae of her, or the golgolet, the skull of the sister, or rov binyana, if you have most of the main structure of the body of the bones, or rov minyana, or most of the limbs, if you count like how many limbs and the majority of the limbs. Well, katuv, you might have thought you can't. Here's the important part. Katuv amarta alehem. Hosif la katuv tuma acheret. But basically, when it comes to the sister, because it says in the beginning of the section, it says, the amarta alehem lenefesh lo yitama ba'amav. Okay, this is to the kohenim. You can't become impure. Lo yitama, because it says ba'amarta alehem, that includes there is some other tuma besides just their body. If it's the skull, the back, all the bones of the vertebrae, the majority of or the main part of the body of the bones, or the majority of the bones, if it's the majority or some important part, you can actually become impure. So what do you see from this? Clearly, it doesn't have to be whole. If it needed to be whole, you wouldn't, right? You wouldn't be able to be impure to parts of the body. So this braitot is going to go on a little more, but again, I'll already tell you the Gemara is going to answer. This is Rabbi Yehuda, so don't worry. This is it, right? A unique opinion, a da'at yachid, as we say, and that's not your issue. So again, the three main things we did today. One was this tum'ah and bi'an. How could that work according to Raba? The second was this machloket Rebbe and Tanna Kama, we learned from lehechalor b'motam that it's only in their death, and then machloket Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish on that. Would it include goses or not? Is it forbidden in some way? Again, we had to figure out exactly what way, but it's already considered desecrating if, according to Reish Lakish, according to one of the Tanaim, according to Tanna Kama, if you become impure if you come into a room or touch someone who's about to die. Again, we're talking about a Nazir and a kohen gadol. From there, we switch to a regular kohen, and from there, we have this whole discussion. We have Rav Chisda, who quotes Rav as saying something which seems to disagree with the Tana, Rabbi Yehuda, about whether or not you can only become impure to your father or any of your relatives if you're a regular kohen, if their body is completely intact. And if their body is not completely intact, maybe it's an issue. According to Rav Chisda, in the name of Rabbanit, according to the Rabbi Yehuda, it's not an issue. You're actually allowed to be. Again, he draws a line, like still not kazayim min amed or something small. But if it's something significant, some significant part of their body, then you're allowed to become impure to. Okay, and like I said, we didn't talk halacha l'maaseh, so it's interesting to look up, what happened to this and do we hold this exactly? Homework for you to do. Okay, wishing everybody a Purim Sameach, and tomorrow class as usual.